Once the greatest IP in entertainment history and one of the greatest lines in toy history. Now a cautionary tale about mismanagement. Ironically, Star Wars has become everything George Lucas hates about filmmaking. Over several months, I published a corporate studios series. At the time, my channel had a fraction of its current attractive and intelligent subscriber base. The series is arguably my finest work and its points bear repeating. So I combined 6 parts into one and added a prologue and epilogue. The result is this video. If you've never watched it, I believe the series will spark critical thinking. If you've watched it in parts, I encourage you to review it as a coherent entity. Either way, you'll find truth in it. And you'll follow a timeline to the present miserable condition of Star Wars. Note the shift in my analysis following Bob Iger's return. As a corporate studio executive, Iger is unusually destructive because he is both profiteer and ideologue. Without further preamble, the folly of corporate studio executives.
The studio executives generally are not the most sophisticated people in the world. And you will find that if you go to Hollywood. I hope you don't, because you don't want to be oppressed by people who are not as smart as you are.
Why must we endure a mediocre at best era of entertainment? Until he sold his life's work to Disney, George Lucas sincerely told anyone who'd listen about the evils of corporate studios. He felt stifled and extorted in Hollywood, where executives who didn't understand storytelling and filmmaking limited the creative people who did. After a humbling pitch campaign and a forced re-edit of American Graffiti, Lucas vowed to be free from the banality of risk-averse bean counters and arrogant, unimaginative trust fund babies. Columbia, Fox, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Paramount all passed on American Graffiti. Universal backed it but constrained Lucas's plans with a low budget and revoked his Final Cut privilege just prior to release. In countless interviews, Lucas happily recalled his move to San Francisco, unprecedented deal for licensing and merchandising rights, and self-financed avoidance of corporate interference.
I was not happy with Hollywood. I didn't want anything to do with them. And so I was really angry about that. Then they did the same thing in American Graffiti because they thought it was a terrible movie. They put it on the shelf. They cut it. They cut 5 minutes out, the magic number. I said, why would you do that? I said, it doesn't make any difference. They said, well, we did it because we can do it. Once Star Wars was a hit, I know what I'm doing for my 50%. You know, I put my heart and soul in this. My whole career is at stake. I've got to actually go out and make the movie. I got all this stuff that I have to do for my 50%. What are you doing for your 50%? They said, well, I provide the money. I said, you don't provide the money. I said, you go to a bank with a letter of credit, and they supply the money. So you're not doing anything, and you get 50% of the movie. So then I came back for Empire Strikes Back, and he looked at it and he said, well, wait a minute. You're getting 100% of the profits. I said, yeah, I'm financing it. Remember that 50% that you had that you were using? Well, I'm doing that now. So you don't get that 50%, and I get my own 50%. So now I got 100%. I'll give you a little distribution agreement on the side here.
And now, decades later, corporate executives continue to fetter the visions of those more intelligent and talented in their employ. Forgive me for asking, how much has changed? I recognize the ironic shift to virtue signaling as Hollywood elitists spread do as I say, not as I do morality to increasingly disillusioned audiences. True pioneers have dwindled in and around the City of Angels. But board members and studio presidents play the same games as before. Do everything on the cheap. Avoid innovation because it entails risk. Intimidate and micromanage subordinates. Apply manufacturing strategies erroneously to a creative industry. Throttle competition with oligarchy. Complain about declining returns while shortchanging everyone for a bigger take. Yet peddle a bright future on earning calls. I recently watched a 3-minute clip of Disney CEO Bob Chapek, full of buzzwords and doublespeak, such as franchise-added content, margin accretion, flexible distribution, and theatrical exhibition releases. What? Thanks to this ilk, major studios have resumed the same uninspired, unappealing output that Lucas challenged during the 1970s. When they look to David Zaslav of Warner Brothers and Bob Chapek of Disney to save them from radical ideology and storytelling, fans are truly lost. If corporate directors believed it could make a few bucks and/or cast them in a favorable light, they would promote the Canadian seal hunt. The questions often asked by Star Wars fans: why was there no comprehensive plan for the sequel trilogy? Why is the Disney age an inconsistent mess? When will Kathleen Kennedy be replaced? For the answers, look no further than corporations that view IP in terms of ROI, return on investment. Don't mistake my meaning. I support competition and the profit motive, which benefit price, quality, and design. It's market share, barriers to entry, influence over price, and other factors that concern me.
It's not about an individual operating unit. It's about the brand. First of all, the brand, the Disney brand. We've got an embarrassment of riches. Why does everything have to be franchise-oriented? Because that's our barrier to entry.
Unfortunately, the studio system is an oligarchy in which firms' interests are best served by the status quo, not exceptionalness, not merit. Whether he forgot or ignored personal experience when he sold to Disney, George Lucas warned us about corporate filmmaking. Evidence proves he was right.
It was a very dark period, and I could have very easily just taken the money and gone off and done one of these really terrible movies. I don't know what that would have done for my career, but there's, when the times are hard like that, you simply have to say, this is what I want to do. I want to make my movie. I don't want to take the money.
Hollywood has become an echo chamber for an increasingly pompous entertainment industry. Los Angeles, one of the most stratified, exclusionary metropolises, ironically peddles morality to the world. Contrary to popular belief, virtue signaling from the Hollywood Hills, Malibu, Venice, and other surrounding areas began long before Ghostbusters 2016 and The Last Jedi. But its intensity and scope have recently spiked. Why? As you consider Hollywood's plunge through the 20-teens, which, let's be honest, is undeniable at this point, you might conclude corporate studios are full of activists, people who view their roles as missions or mandates for societal change, not customers' enjoyment. You would not be wrong. In addition, you might conclude studio executives wish only to collect bonuses and increase shareholder value, not produce classics of the age. Again, you would not be wrong. However, those conclusions appear to indicate activists and executives find themselves at odds. Well, you might be surprised to discover alignment. Executives must approve and finance the output of their studios. They market and distribute the activism that gradually alienates all but their neighbors. Also, they staff their studios. If they were displeased with projects and/or employees, they would make moves. Executives are fond of firing contentious subordinates and saying no when it suits them. Ask George Lucas.
I think for most creative people, they don't like others looking over their shoulders saying, why don't you make that green? Why don't you make that blue? Well, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? I don't like that. Don't put that in there. I want to, it's sort of like Michelangelo and the Pope in terms of doing the Sistine Chapel. It's a very irritating thing, and I'm sure Michelangelo was very irritated with the Pope. And so you try to get yourself into a situation where you only have to answer to yourself, where you can ask advice of people, and sort of work with your peers and mentors and things to try to do the best job that you can possibly do. There's nothing worse than the frustration of having somebody who you feel doesn't get what you're doing, trying to turn it into something else.
So why does the plunge continue? In a word, greed. Executives want more than they can possibly attain. With one production, they strive to attract every demographic: age, gender, race, nationality, etc. The proliferation of PG-13 films is one example of such greed. They would do well to remember the old expression about can't please all of the people all of the time. Yet they took certain segments for granted while pursuing new customers. Here's an obvious example to connect the dots. You probably know women buy and spend more than men. In 2009, the Harvard Business Review published an article explaining women controlled $4.3 trillion, or 73% of U.S. consumer spending. It concluded, as a whole, women represent a growth market bigger than China and India combined. In response to women's escalating consumerism, corporations avidly shifted their sights from men to women across all genres. Feminism's decade-long rise in entertainment seems, through this lens, nothing more than a win-win money-making scheme. Sure, studios produced superhero, sci-fi, and fantasy epics, but executives altered the formulas from male-centric to female-centric. The protagonists, the storylines, they assumed men were loyal to certain genres, but if they could interest women, they could develop their markets and more than double revenue over traditionally male-dominated fare. The decisions weren't sparked by high-mindedness. They were motivated by economics, pure and simple. Unfortunately, leadership wishfully miscalculated based on potential earnings. Reality has taught a harsh lesson, and Star Wars fans have suffered of late. According to Forbes, in 2021, women controlled up to 80% of U.S. consumer spending. So I don't expect studio executives to change their goals anytime soon.
That's what I've earned. That's what I've been struggling for all these years, in the end, to be able to do what I want to do without a lot of corporate interference and craziness. And, and I felt strongly enough about it to where I dedicated myself to getting to a point where I could be independent enough to not have to, go down the path of compromise for the sake of somebody who isn't really that interested in what you're doing anyway.
The PG-13 epoch is one of mediocrity. Since 2001, PG-13 films have constituted over 50% of the North American movie market. Box office receipts show double the gross revenue for PG-13 in comparison to R, and the advantage is obvious: more potential customers. But the disadvantage is also obvious: fewer intelligent, mature narratives. Contemporary cinema is a YA version of past glories. PG-13 movies, despite the allowance of cursing, violence, and nudity, attempt to reach the lowest common denominator. Once again, the greed for more consumers satisfies almost none. Judging by the writing, the target market is preteens. Today, productions like The Terminator, Alien, Jaws, Gladiator, The Shawshank Redemption, The Godfather, Schindler's List, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and The Matrix would have been diluted to reach larger audiences for quarterly earnings. Recall the greatness of those films and all that would have been lost if they'd been compromised. In the past, I've argued about the target market for George Lucas's Star Wars. The oft-repeated misunderstanding Star Wars is for kids breaks down under scrutiny. Its themes resonate with a wide range of viewers, but many are fully accessible only to adults. The slide from democracy to autocracy, and the possessiveness of intimate relationships, for example. Lucas films aren't designed for the lowest common denominator, yet they are comprehensible by children. Quality entertainment doesn't conform to dividend forecasts, but the latter will follow if the former is given precedence. This fact is often lost on studio executives who prioritize their bonuses and shareholder value over artistry. Their approach is the antithesis of effective business management. Joseph Bauer and Lynn Payne of Harvard Business School view shareholder value as the error at the heart of corporate leadership, flawed in its assumptions, confused as a matter of law, and damaging in practice. The key is customer value. Management guru Peter Drucker wrote, "What a business thinks it produces is not of first importance. What the customers think they are buying, what they consider value, is decisive. It determines what a business is, what it produces, and whether it will prosper." Drucker defined leadership as the lifting of a person's vision to higher heights and the raising of a person's performance to a higher standard. Board members' insistence on PG-13 for profit frustrates writers' and directors' visions and lowers standards. Films produced for the lowest common denominator rarely, if ever, become classics that deliver broadcast, streaming, and merchandise sales over decades. They're not fondly remembered or recommended from generation to generation. Promises of support and artistic integrity are often broken for reshoots and edits mandated by executives outside the creative process. It's a bit like taking your auto to the shop for repairs, haggling over the estimate, standing at the mechanic's shoulder, giving unsolicited advice mixed with vague encouragement, and just prior to completion, overhauling the work because you don't understand it and believe you can do better.
It's Darth Vader! Watch out! And he's got a lightsaber!
It's Kenner's new Star Wars action figures, each sold separately.
I've got you now, Ben Kenobi!
In the US, over $2 billion were spent on action figures and accessories during 2021. The toy category ranks 7th, and boys constitute more than 80% of it. For context, outdoor and sports toys rank first. Dolls, a separate category, earned $3.75 billion with an even steeper slant towards girls last year. Looking back, Star Wars was the catalyst for the golden age of action figures, the late 70s to early 90s. No other era turned as many IP into successful toy lines and produced a comparable volume of films, shows, and comics as toy advertisements. G.I. Joe, the Transformers, He-Man, Ninja Turtles. You're no doubt familiar with the franchises whose values were based on their action figures. George Lucas's toy profit exceeded his box office revenue by a factor of at least 4. 10 years ago, Disney paid $4.05 billion for Lucas's studio, mainly for Star Wars merchandise. Many argue action figures aren't attractive or not as attractive in today's digital age. Some say the market is now dominated by collectors, not children. A few claim gender-neutral toys will and/or should replace action figures and dolls. Regardless, billions in annual sales cannot be ignored, and studio executives didn't ignore it, they just fundamentally misunderstood it. I talked about greed's negative impact on entertainment, executives' endeavors to draw every demographic. Greed stunted action figures too. Corporations failed to acquire new customers and alienated existing customers through strong-arm tactics. Studios forced toy manufacturers to produce action figures of new characters at the expense of established characters. They threatened non-renewal of licensing agreements unless their demands were satisfied. In Star Wars terms, mandates for Rose and Rey decreased the availability of Vader and Luke. Why the coercion? Executives assumed boys were a constant and wanted to increase girls' demand. As they advanced female protagonists in all genres, they projected box office, streaming, and toy synergy. Also, they preferred full royalties from new characters over partial royalties from established characters. What went wrong? The source material was poorly received. Boys avoided the new characters, girls remained uninterested, and manufacturers resented the interference. By attempting to boost them, studio executives shrunk action figure sales. Manipulation by the studio oligarchy failed twice over, first with films and shows, second with merchandise. Executives ignored decades, yes, decades of data and good advice from industry experts. Toy manufacturers warned and pushed back. No, Hollywood knew better. The studio's narrative became lack of exposure and availability influenced demand. If only tradition gave way, parents were educated, and children freed to choose. If only new options were presented, commerce would flow.
You know, I think first of all, the thing that we really aspire to constantly is quality. Whether we're creating games, publishing, or we're making television, or working on our movies.
Can you go bigger? Is that important to kind of be on that scale?
It's never about going bigger just to go bigger. Sometimes by the nature of the number of characters that you have in the toy box to then bring into the sandbox of the story, things can get bigger. But
I don't want to single anything out because everything we talked about today, I think you're going to find each and every show and all the new characters we're introducing are just fantastic. So I couldn't be more excited.
Well, Winston Churchill recommended, however beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results. Examine Hasbro's quarterly revenues and you'll notice a 2-year dip after The Last Jedi, which reveals opportunity cost. The missing profit from popular action figures that were not manufactured since Disney's new characters had priority. Netflix, Paramount, Warner, all studios went in similar directions because oligarchs apply game theory. After one moves, all react for fear of losing market share. You'll spot similar trends in the auto industry. No one produces hybrids until everyone produces hybrids. In this case, mistakes multiplied and affected the multi-billion-dollar action figure market.
That's completely the antithesis of what a big modern corporation is. They want to test things 360 ways. You just go out
So
and
Hollywood is not like a big American corporation because it'll just throw money away behind somebody.
But they don't know. But they don't know how to do that because they're basically corporate types. They think the worst thing that happens when they think they know how to do it. Then they start making decisions that ensure that it's not going to work.
But you're George Lucas.
I'd heard about Bob Chapek's Machiavellian strategies since he became Disney's CEO in February 2020. Several YouTube hosts described him as a bean counter, which his public appearances confirmed. He was an awkward, unconvincing spokesperson. Service decreases and fees on top of ticket increases marked his tenure as head of Disney Parks. Some called him a genius who'd curtail expenditures after his predecessor, Bob Iger, purchased every multi-billion-dollar studio that he fancied. To date, I've never observed any sign of genius in Chapek. Here, he attempted to spin a price hike for Disney+.
Specifically to your question about the ad tier and the price increase, we thought that this was the perfect time to go ahead and really sort of bring up that price value equation so that we're more accurately reflecting the value that a guest or a consumer or viewer gets with Disney Plus by taking up the price.
During a previous video, I flagged his corporate doublespeak and warned against faith in the likes of him. I'd heard about Susan Arnold, chair of the board since December 2021, forcing Bob Iger to leave so his power could be redistributed. From 2011 to 2020, Iger had been chair and CEO, which meant, said reputable sources, the board couldn't control him. Iger remained with Disney until Arnold succeeded him as chair, almost 2 years after Chapek replaced him as CEO. Iger didn't go gentle into that good night. He lingered to the point of hindrance. These sources indicated Chapek was Arnold's choice, handpicked. She allegedly preferred his style of less for more in streaming, cinema, and acquisitions. The entire board had, all along, purportedly favored entertainment over activism, an Igerian virtue that eroded trust in the corporation's products for children. To summarize, I'd heard Chapek's long game would reduce costs, silence internal activists, and repair Disney's family-friendly image. Well, a few questions. Who lacks long-term vision? Who prioritizes profit over quality? Who claims intellectual and moral superiority over paying customers? Who regularly sacrifices beloved IP on the altar of virtue signaling? And who will find a patsy to blame for hard times? You know the answer is corporate studio executives, including board members.
You got to remember in those days, even Star Wars was experimental. Even Star Wars was something that studios, a couple studios turned it down. Alan Ladd Jr., when he gave me the go-ahead, he said, look, I don't understand this script. I don't understand your movie. That's somebody that says, I'm going to invest in talent. I'm not going to invest in this project. Right. I'm going to invest in somebody that I believe in. And he reaped the rewards of that. And he had to fight the board, and everybody else, because nobody else believed in it or understood it.
Disney's Q4 report, released on November 8th, Election Day, was the catalyst for Chapek's dismissal and Iger's return. Or was it? According to some, the board couldn't stomach single-digit revenue growth, layoffs, and declining stock prices, so it restored Iger, the architect of its current woes. Ironic. According to others, a combination of environmental social governance, mutual fund investors, a cryptocurrency exchange, and accounting fraud led to Chapek's removal. Regardless of the cause or causes, and we may never learn the truth, Iger for 2 more years? Really? Yes, he is a polished spokesperson. Yes, Disney creatives like him. Yes, he can be a spin doctor when the corporation makes mistakes, which means he'll be spinning frequently in the coming months. But in 2020, he handed a multi-billion-dollar bomb with a lit fuse to Chapek, and Chapek, who foolishly accepted it, had neither the talent nor tools to defuse it. Iger's major acquisitions and product launches fell far short of expectations, due to the short-sighted agenda he shared with the board. Lucasfilm, Fox Entertainment, Pixar, Disney+, Shanghai Disney, the list goes on. Marvel is profitable but suffered an underwhelming Phase 4. The Star Wars sequel trilogy is fading and taking down Galaxy's Edge and the Galactic Starcruiser. Pixar is no longer making films for mass appeal. Disney owns only 43% of its resort in Shanghai. Fox Entertainment's IP haven't been successfully integrated. Disney Plus apparently won't generate returns on schedule. Iger engineered and Chapek christened these failures. Yet, based on timing, many perceive them as Chapek's alone. Hypocritically, Iger criticized every Chapek move from the safety of, "I'm not the CEO anymore." In his triumphant town hall meeting, Iger happily acknowledged problems to further vilify Chapek, and optimistically stated Disney would tone down its objectionable ideologies. He called them core values. Not discontinue, de-emphasize.
Do I like the company being embroiled in controversy? Of course not. It can be distracting, and it can have a negative impact on the company. And to the extent that I can work to kind of quiet things down, I'm going to do that. But I think it's important to put in perspective what some of these subjects are. I think that some of the subjects that have proven to be controversial as it relates to Disney have been branded political. And we're certainly not going to lessen our core values in order to make everybody happy all the time. So it's complicated, and there's a balance. And I at one point I said, we do what we believe is right.
I must ask, was Chapek just a fall guy from the beginning? Perhaps an acute problem led to his discharge, but over the past decade, the board's self-serving agenda has become a self-destructive pattern. Shutdowns, streaming saturation, bloated budgets, price increases, reimagined tomorrow, parental rights and education, Reedy Creek, Peter Rice, Chapek's renewal. And still the corporation turns 23% growth TY over LY according to the Q4 report. However, with short-sighted, profit-hungry, and self-appointed crusaders at the helm, what could the future hold? I admit, I misjudged Iger and the board. I thought greed was dating activism for convenience. Turns out, greed and activism had a child and named them Progress. Of course, Star Wars, my favorite franchise, is caught in Disney's web. I feel sorry for George Lucas, but after warning us about corporate filmmaking, he sold to the mouse.
What is the work that is going to take another perhaps 2 years or even more, even after you do leave, that needs to get done?
Well, the transformative work, of course, is making sure that our cost structure reflects the dealing with businesses that are no-growth businesses and what to do about them, and particularly expansively about opportunities there, because clearly...
On July 12th, we learned Bob Iger, Disney's CEO, accepted a 2-year contract extension. He replaced Bob Chapek last November after mock retirement in 2020. Recall, Iger maintained his Burbank office, lobbied for reappointment, and regularly undermined Chapek throughout our time at home period. Now, as before, he and his fellow bodhisattvas on the board are vigorously destroying Disney. They oversee all the alphabet activism and risk aversion that currently plagues the corporation. I won't list their mistakes in the interest of conciseness. Many other channels exist to report them, so if you wish, search YouTube for Disney failures. You'll be rewarded with thousands of videos. In all honesty, I feel myself slipping to the dark side. Fear, anger, hate. I fear Star Wars and other classic IP have been soiled and won't recover. I'm angry about identity politics spread by exploitative elites, from their mansions, lake houses, private beaches, and mountain villas. I hate people who seek to diminish fictional heroes. Luke, Han, Lando, Indy, Kirk, Spock, Batman, Superman, Thor, Falcon, Doctor Strange, G.I. Joe. Their hit list expands with most releases from American studios. Here we find Bob Iger with his once family-friendly brand. He's 72, and like a certain political ally, might die before relinquishing power. Monopolization and recycling are his ways. He ascended from college weatherman to head of ABC Entertainment in just 17 years. When it purchased ABC, Disney retained Iger as president and COO. He secured the same title at Disney in 2000. 5 years later, CEO. 6 years later, chairman of the board. He cultivated quid pro quo relationships with executives at Apple, Nike, General Motors, JP Morgan, Procter & Gamble, Citibank, Meta, as well as the Obama administration, to take seats on Disney's board. All the current members, all his rubber stampers, were elected in the past 8 years with his blessings. He is a marketing, public relations, and acquisitions expert, but he's not a creative type. Iger and his ilk believe wealth and power equal virtue. Consider the ego to deceive oneself that lucrative career paths like media or sales somehow bring enlightenment. Consider the hubris of Hollywood, in particular, to sell morality plays. During his tenure, Iger's pontification has worsened from, "I'll use my position to signal my embrace of identity politics," to, "I'll turn entertainment into a vehicle for identity politics," to, "I'll turn my corporation into a platform for identity politics." If you're unfamiliar, identity politics uses traits such as race, ethnicity, religion, and gender to differentiate and uplift subsets. Its message appeals to many by excusing undesirable circumstances and promoting equity of outcome. Ironically, its message has been hijacked by elites to ease consciences, grant social status, and play the ESG game.
That is a most illogical attitude.
We're witnessing the results of Iger's ego today. To secure his reputation, to be on the right side of history, as the catchphrase goes, he's eliminated all dissenting voices, forsaken the profit motive, and sunk unsinkable franchises. But in keeping with his peers, he hedges his bets. He wishes to cement a progressive image, the enlightened millionaire. Yet he and his board members would rather recycle existing IP than chance new IP. The contradiction between progressive and conservative is lost on them. They visit the same well again and again. But to canonize themselves, they drop identity politics into it. Unsurprisingly, identity politics hasten the well's depletion as global audiences reject the message. When their buckets come up empty, they seek another established well and repeat the process. Disney's era of innovation is over. Its latest films, The Little Mermaid, Elemental, and The Dial of Destiny. Its latest high-profile Disney Plus exclusives, Mando 3, Peter Pan and Wendy, and Secret Invasion. Elemental is the only original or non-sequel. All underperformed. All feature identity politics, casting or writing or both. Mostly phylogeny and misandry. I've watched 5 of 6. They range from bad to terrible. Iger at the helm. Entertainment can inspire critical thinking, discussion, and ultimately societal change when cleverly produced for a wide audience. In my experience, nuance trumps naked idealism and judgment. Nothing grows from sanctimony and hypocrisy. Why would we look to show business as a beacon of morality?
About the spiritual journey of what it is to become who you are.
I'm not optimistic. As a fan, you understand the dark side, the fear, anger, and hate. Bob Iger thinks he bamboozled George Lucas to acquire Star Wars. To him, it's former competition, present soapbox. When confronted with his own defeats, he peacocks. For example, his halt to Star Wars films in 2019. He endorsed the sequel trilogy and Galaxy's Edge, so he was responsible for their failures. But he shifted blame and sought credit with an obvious announcement.
We will take a pause, some time, and reset. There will be a bit of a hiatus.
His insincere mea culpa focused on content. Too much, too fast. No acknowledgement of his role in all proceedings. Last week, he offered the same excuse for Marvel, saying,
"Not only did they increase their movie output, but they ended up making a number of television series, and frankly, it diluted focus and attention."
Nothing about storytelling and quality, eh? Last November, he defended recent narrative themes for Disney, Pixar, Lucasfilm, and Marvel as necessary for inclusion, which in corporate speak means alphabet soup. Hard to explain decreasing share price, tickets, subscriptions, audience approval, and merchandise sales to a guy who's never made a mistake. Hey, I found a real theme. When Star Wars craters, he regrets the loss of prestige and vehicle, not revenue or supporters, because his mission, his virtue, transcends money. And in a sense, he's correct, thanks to his personal fortune and unchallenged leadership, which frees him from performance standards. Read his memoir. The implications for Star Wars are more of the same. More diminished heroes, more identity politics, more peacocking. He can't be trusted with the IP. Kathleen Kennedy, an ideological ally but an inherited obstacle to Iger, will not go quietly. He'll push her into the crosshairs as often as possible, though they share an agenda. Together, they could take down the entire franchise by 2026, when Iger will receive another contract extension if he so desires. Many pray for Kennedy's departure, but an Igerian successor wouldn't, in all likelihood, be chosen for knowledge and imagination. Careful what you wish for. I miss the days when customers, entertainment, and income mattered.
The movie business is exactly like professional gambling, except you hire the gambler. Usually some crazy kid with long hair who's like, I don't get this guy at all. You give him $100 million and you say, go to the tables and come back with $500 million. That is a risk. Now, the studios don't want to think of it that way. They say, well, maybe if we told him that he couldn't bet on red, maybe if we told him, because we did market research and we realized that red wasn't, so they tried to minimize their risk. But and of course, you're hiring the kid to take risks, to be creative, to do things that have never been done before, never been tested. You have no idea whether they're going to work or not. That's completely the antithesis of what a big modern corporation is.
Since the final episode of my corporate studio series, add Ahsoka, Loki Season 2, and Wish to Disney's string of failures. Iger cast himself as a noble rescuer and prepared to receive applause from grateful fans. History will judge him as another corporate studio executive whose ego prompted him to meddle in creative spaces. His recent pledges to focus on storytelling and downplay messaging are ironic, since he is responsible for prioritizing the latter over the former. He stocked the board, chose the division leaders, set the course, and issued the directives. His actions as chairman and CEO caused the downfall of Star Wars, Marvel, and Pixar. He embraced ESG for personal reasons, rather than quality, family-friendly entertainment in keeping with the rich tradition of his employer. Remember Susan Arnold, Iger's successor as CEO? Allegedly a supporter of Bob Chapek. She was replaced in January, 2 months after Iger's return. Christine McCarthy, CFO? She was replaced last month. When confronted with his own mistakes, Iger went looking for scapegoats. George Lucas warned us about corporate studio executives. Yet, when I ponder his deal with Disney, Emperor Palpatine comes to mind. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Check out Galactic Initiative for all things Star Wars.
Galactic Initiative is not authorized or endorsed by Lucasfilm Limited. The name Star Wars and all related materials are registered trademarks of Lucasfilm Limited, a subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, all rights reserved. Galactic Initiative is a registered trademark, and other product and company names are trademarks of their respective holders. Use does not imply affiliation or endorsement.